Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Viking Guitar University. As always, I am your professor, Dr. Viking Guitar, and today we have another lesson on Reaper. This is kind of an interesting one because it's a catch-all lesson. We're going to go over a bunch of stuff that either could have been in earlier videos or could have been spelled out better, or just some things that you might not have been ready for or didn't even need yet. But we're just this is kind of a rounding out video to round out some of your Reaper knowledge. And in the next video, we're going to get into actually a walkthrough of recording a song start to finish the way I usually do it for the most part. So let's open up Reaper. And right off the bat, you're going to see that I've got a couple things going on here. I've got two tracks labeled Guitar 1 and Guitar 2. And then down here, I have a MIDI instrument that is loaded up with this thing called Poison. We're not going to worry about the MIDI instrument for now. I just put it there because I don't want to deal with it right now. So let's just listen through to what this is doing first. Okay, that's enough. It does it a second repetition between here and there-ish. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is item volume. Up to this point, we've controlled volume through the fader here, and we can do it with envelopes as well. If we want to bring up the volume envelope, we could control through there. But there's a way to do it a bit quicker depending on what it is you're doing. Now, let's mute everything else except let's look at this Guitar 2 track here. Now, this is called an item here. We've got the track, and then we have individual items on it, and then individual takes for those items. So, like if I armed this and I record it again, it would have a second take there that I could switch between. And when I record, it splits it here and splits it there, so I can switch between the two. Technically, this is an item, this is an item, and this is an item. So we can kind of edit things on an item-specific basis instead of having to do things just on the track or just with an envelope. So let's get rid of that secondary thing there. Control-Z back. There we go. And we can split this into two items by just splitting it. So let's go to the midpoint, and we'll hit the S button to split it into two. So now we have this take here across two items. Now, first off, what I want to show you how to do is how to adjust the item-specific volume. Now, this is a way to do it without changing the track volume, without doing envelopes. But if we select one of these items here, and then hover our mouse over the top, you'll see how it turns into that little up-down arrow. If you click and drag, it'll come up with item volume, and we can minimize the volume that way. This is a really useful tool if you're recording something and there's one part that really spikes, like let's say this note. We don't like this note right here. What have I done? I hit the wrong button. Anyway, let's say this note. We don't like this note. So what we could do is set up an envelope to kind of lower the volume there and then increase it. We could do it with a compressor, which is a mixing tool that we'll get into using later. But the other quick and dirty way to do it is just split it at the start, split it at the end, and then lower the volume for that specific thing. And if we listen to it before, it sounds like this. We'll just start from here. But now we can lower it, and it can be... Hear how quiet it is? We'll even make it more quiet so you can hear. Cool. So now what we've done is we've looked at how to do individual volume things. You can't raise the volume beyond what it already is here, but it is a way to lower it. Another thing we can do is we can stretch an item. Now let's take a look here, and we'll notice my imperfect playing. Let's say that we've noticed this note here is really much more before the beat than we want it. And I don't know. Looking at this closely, I'm not really playing close to the beat at all this closely. But let's say that this note, we want to fix this up. What we can do is we can split it at the start, split it at the end of the note, and then we can go over to the little area here where the actual split is. And let's zoom in on this nice and close. Now what we can do is if we hold the Alt button, it'll turn into these hands gripping. So we can do this either with adjacent items there by holding Alt, or if we want, we can just erase this and just do it specific to this item. Now what we want to do is hold Alt, go to the beginning, and you'll see it turns into this hand icon. And if we click and drag, what it'll do is it'll stretch that thing. If we did it without the Alt, basically what it's doing is just moving the start point of the track. But if we hold Alt, it's actually stretching it. And then we can move it right up to where we want so that beat is nice and on the beat. And as you can see, when we do it, this rate thing at the bottom comes up, this little meter here. And that shows you, at what rate it's playing this sound clip as opposed to its original length. So now it's playing at 1.08, times as fast as it was before. If we have it with another audio file there, the cool thing is that it'll stretch both of them accordingly to make it fit. One of the hazards you need to keep in mind, though, is you really want to be finite with this stuff. Because let's say we hadn't split it here over at this region there. Let's say we hadn't split it, and all we had done is clicked here, split it, and then decided, okay, we'll stretch it over. Now, as we do that, it's going to stretch all the rest of this audio file, which might create timing issues down the road. Same thing over here. We're stretching this whole thing now, and it might, if we just had a timing issue right over here, by stretching it and stretching it here, we might be creating more timing issues at the beginning here and at the end here. So a good idea if you're going to do something like this is really isolate what you want, and then just do your stretching so it really only affects a small portion of it there. Another thing we can do is we can apply effects just to one item or the other. Now, these will go independent of the track effects. So let's say we want, let's say on the track effect, we want to put delay on the whole thing. So there we go. But let's say for this segment right here, from that point to that point, we also want to have this have a bunch of flange on it. Now what we can do is right click, go to item settings. No, not item settings. We can go to take and do show effects chain for active take. And we can go down here and let's put our chorus or whatever. What did I say? We're doing chorus. So there's chorus. We'll turn that way up so it's super audible. And now when we play it through, we'll have delay over all of it, but just chorus over this item here. You hear that? We can click on this effects button here to open it back up. We can also do it with something like an EQ just to make it a bit more obvious. There, we'll cut off all the low end so it's... There you go. So those are item-specific effects. Let's get rid of all this. So we go back to where we started. Close. There. Another thing we can do is we can reverse this, and this is a super cool thing that I like doing. If we right-click on this, go to item settings, and then we can do reverse active take. What it does is it splits, it just reverses this. So now when we listen to it, one thing to keep in mind is when we do the reverse, it'll do it for the entire chunk here. So as you can see, even though it starts at the right point here, when I reversed it, it took this part and put it all the way back over here. So if we wanted to do this really precisely, we would split it there. And now we would go to item settings, reverse active take, and now it'll actually line up a bit better. Pretty cool, huh? So that's how to reverse items. And one couple other things we're going to talk about is we can right-click, go to item settings, and we can go to lock item. This means that we can't do anything with it. We can move these other ones, but we can't move that guy. We can't adjust the volume. We can't do anything to it. If you have an item that you really want to make sure you don't accidentally move or delete, easy way to go is just go to item settings, lock item, and then we can turn that off as well. And let's bring this guy back to where he was. We can also lock a track. If you just click on the track, go up to the track folder here and go down to lock track controls. This will make it so you can't accidentally adjust anything. None of the faders, none of the effects, anything. It bars you from doing anything. So once again, it's a nice way to keep all the controls the way you want them to be if you're doing a bunch of stuff and you don't want to accidentally make a mistake. To turn it off, just go back to track, go to lock track controls. Two other things we're going to talk about here. Let's move this guy out of the way for a minute, and let's just take a look at this guy. Now, let's say that we want to cut this guy right here, right before any sound is audible. So we move the cursor there, hit S to split it, and then delete it. Now, we've kind of created an interesting situation here if we want to move this item, because before, if we keep snapping on, what this means is that as we move it, it'll automatically keep it locked to the grid. So if we want to move it one beat forward or one bar forward, we just move it 4 beats forward, and then we can do it again and do it again as much as we want. And we know that wherever we put it, it's going to be in time because it's snapping to the grid and the item starts at the grid. But let's say we've already gone in here, we turn snapping off, and let's say we split it there to cut off all the dead space at the beginning, and now let's say we want to move it but keep it aligned to the grid. Well, how do we do that? Because if we turn snapping on, as soon as we start moving this, it's going to align the beginning of the file to the next grid point, which isn't the same as before, where it was actually a bit before. An easy way to get around this is to turn snapping back on, go up to the first grid point, hit S to split it, remove the crossfades, and then click on this one, hit Control, and click on this one so we have both items selected. And then when we move it, it'll snap that way. That's just a quick little workaround for that. And one other thing I haven't talked about is if you want to connect these two again, we can do it either by right-clicking and going to glue items, or we can go down to heal splits in items, and it gets rid of that split. It's gone. See how nice and gone it is? A couple other things I want to talk about with MIDI. So what we're going to do is we're going to mute this guitar track, and we're going to turn on this MIDI track, and like I said, it's this VST instrument called Poison. It's not free, but it's fairly cost-effective. It's not bad. It's got some DRM stuff that's kind of frustrating. But anyway, this MIDI line here has replaced this guitar line. Okay, so two things. First off, let's open up the MIDI thing here. One thing I forgot to mention is that in addition to adjusting velocity down here on the bar, you can do note-specific velocity by hovering at the top and dragging down. See how it changes it there? It's kind of just like doing item-specific volume editing or volume lowering. You can do it that way. Another thing I want to talk about is using envelopes for VST instruments. And this is something that you probably could have intuited if you were thinking about it in this certain direction, but I want to spell it out for you guys because it's a really cool, important thing, and I just want to make sure that you understand this. So back in the envelope video, we talked about how we can use envelopes to control aspects of effects. Like if I have this delay effect on the lead guitar line here, and we'll turn off the MIDI for a minute, I can open up the effects and see for that instrument here, and we'll just have both showing just to spell this out here. See, we've got a pan control and a pan control. We've got mono button, type, all this stuff. Pretty much all these controls can either be set and then left or controlled through automation in the envelopes here. Now, this also applies to most VST instruments. Some of them don't let you do it, but a lot of them do. So if we take a look at Poison here, you can see that it's, why did I close it? We've got like 1,000,001 frickin' controls here. We've got a keyboard line, we've got all this LFOs, low frequency oscillation stuff, envelope, amplifier, all these different oscillators and balance and all this stuff. And I'm not going to teach you how to use synthesizers because I only have a kind of loose grasp of it. I'm the type of guy that just turns knobs until it sounds the way I want, and then I leave it. But one thing that I will tell you about is this cutoff and filter thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to play this MIDI line, and we're just going to listen to it. We're going to set it to repeat so we can kind of demonstrate a point here. And what I'm going to do is change this control here. This cutoff right here. You see how that drastically changes the sound of the instrument? It's a really cool thing. It's fun to set it and leave it, but it's even more fun to be able to change that while the song is playing to give it some dynamics to it. So let's listen to both of these tracks as it is right here. Okay? Now, if we want to make the sound cooler, turn off the guitar line here, we'll open up the envelopes, and here are all of our variables for our Poisson synthesizer. Now, you might be saying, but that's too many, and you would be probably correct in a lot of ways. It's at least it's hard to go find what we want out of here. So once again, remember the show last tux.fx parameters button? If we click this, it will show that the last knob we were working with was this filter cutoff. So now we can turn that on, and we can look at that as an envelope that we can do automation with. So it starts the filter with it set to where it was already. And what we can do is we can create our points, and we can do whatever we want with them and control it this way. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to create a few points here. I'm going to set this one really high, and then set the shape on this to be a fast end. And this one we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to do a fast start. And now let's bypass the envelope real quick. It sounds like this. Or actually, it set it back up to the top when I bypassed it. But anyway, it sounds like this in a static way with the knob set at one spot. But let's say we turn this back on. Now it sounds like this. Isn't that just so much cooler? Let's listen back to it with the guitar because I'm still stoked about how cool this sounds. Awesome, right? Now think about what this actually means. This means that we can go in here and we can use envelopes to control anything in this synthesizer. You're going to have to play around with this based on the VST instruments you have and stuff, but just keep in mind that probably most of the time you have the ability to control this stuff as the song is playing instead of just setting it and leaving it, which is really a lot of fun in my opinion and makes music a lot more dynamic. So a couple other things we're going to look at here. First off, we're going to talk about grouping items together. Now, let's say that we've got, a couple of different items here, and we want to move some of them. But let's say we want to take this item, this item, this item, and let's delete the rest of these just for the sake of it. Let's say we want to move these all over. Now, what we could do is we could move this one over, and then that one over, and then that one over. But already I've forgotten, did I move 2 spaces or 3? Another way to do it would be to hold Shift and select all of them, move them at once, but then when we click to a different item, it forgets that we have all these together, and if we go to move it again, we have to select them all. A way to get around this is to select all of them, right-click, go to Group, and Group Items. See these little guys that showed up? This means that all of these guys are to be considered together. So if, let's say I want to move this guy and move that guy, but then I'm like, oh, I need to move these guys too. I just click one, move it, and they all move. Now, if we want to remove one from the group, we just click on that one, go to remove item from the group. If we want to remove another one, right click, go to group, remove items from group. Or what we could do is we could right click, go to group, and select all items in group, and that'll put the focus on all of them. So that is a really cool thing. Now let's get back to where we were before I did all this splitting and erasing and all that stuff. Okay, and there we are. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about, and we're going to get rid of this MIDI line for now because we don't need it, are regions. Now, regions are a super cool way of controlling big chunks of data in a track here. Let's highlight this whole part. And if we go to it's insert, go to region from time selection. What this does is you see this bar that shows up top here. This means that we are to consider all of this stuff as part of this region, even if I unselect it. Now we can right click on this, we can go to edit region, and we can call this part 1. Now, if I want to move these individual things, I can move them as I need to, but let's say I want to move all of it together. I click on the region here, move the region, and it moves everything in that region. Now, It'll cut off stuff before and at the end of it, but that's just kind of how it goes. Then we move it back, and there we go. This is really, really effective if we're dealing with time signature issues. So let's go back to before we did any moving here. So we've got region 1 here, and as you might notice, the song is at 100 beats per minute, and this first part is at 100 beats per minute. Now, let's say later on in the song we have a segment that's at 180 beats per minute. One thing to mention also is both of these guitar tracks are set to the time base of time, so we don't deal with any stretching inadvertently with different tempo things. But let's say that we've got this part, which is part 1, and then we have this part, which is part 2. Now, normally, let's say we wanted to move part 2 closer to part 1. If we just select these two items and drag them over, we're going to encounter a problem, because we're dragging it past this time mark, and the tempo doesn't change until this part in the song. Now, since these guitar tracks are set to time as their time base, it's not going to stretch or skew these at all, like it would if, if these were, let's say, we'll set this to project time base. Now, as we move this one, it's going to stretch it to try and force it into this tempo here and keep this tempo here, which is just another mess. But let's say that we want to move this whole part over. Well, we could select both of these and move it, but then when we start moving the time here, it gets all wonky. It's hard to do that precisely because it's adjusting the time in real time. Another way we could try to do it would be to move the time first and then move it over, but it's still just sloppy. So what if we created a region out of this? If we select the whole thing, we go to Insert, Region from Time Selection, we right-click on it, and we call this Region 2. Another cool thing we can do is we can set the color of the region. So let's say we want that. Okay, we can edit this one to set the color to be blue. And now, if we're looking at a big song with a lot of complex parts, it's really easy to keep track of which one's where. Now, let's say we want to move these parts over now. Instead of moving the individual files, what we'll do is we'll just click on the region and move it over, and it moves it over with the timing intact. We can even move it to the beginning before the first part, and now it's this part at this tempo and then this one. See how it preserves all that stuff? It will create these other little time signature, time change things here, but that's just to make sure that it's not doing some inadvertent time change. It's just a way of Reaper preserving what the tempo was at this point before you crammed this region in front of it. A couple other things we can do with regions is if we hold Shift and double-click it and bring up this editor, we can look at the region manager. Now, what this guy does is this is a quick way to look at all your different regions. It shows the start and end time, the length of it. We can also look at markers here if we have them. Another thing we can do from here is we can render this individual region to an audio file. And what we can also do is if we want to go to the render thing here, we can go to the render bounds and we can go to project regions. And what this will do is this is a way to render these two to two different audio files, like two different MP3s. This is really useful if you're just finishing up a CD and you've got track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4. Instead of going in and manually rendering each one, you can just go to set them up as regions and go and render them that way. So basically all I'm trying to say is regions are a really useful tool. It'll also move envelope points, like let's say we've got a volume envelope here and we got, this stuff and this guy and that guy is there. If we move this, it'll just move that guy. But if we move the whole region, it'll preserve everything with it. So regions are a nice tool. I recommend creating a dummy track and just playing around with it a bit just to get a feel for how it works. And that is more or less the last pure Reaper lesson. The next one is going to be a walkthrough of how I record a song. And then after that, we're going to get into mixing and mastering techniques. So once again, thanks for attending Viking Guitar University. I am Viking Guitar. And until next time, keep the world metal.